Hi everyone, Nathan here. We expect weddings to be the happiest days of our lives, but these celebrations became funerals because of moments no one saw coming. From a mother who collapsed on the church steps right after blessing her son's wedding, to a bride whose dream wedding exit was shattered by a stranger's firework. It was May 14, 2018, at a historic cathedral in Savannah, Georgia. Family and friends gathered outside, waiting for the bride and groom to leave the church. Many guests stood near the entrance with their phones ready, while the cathedral's original marble steps led down to the courtyard. The person I want to tell you about is Isadora Whitmore, a 58-year-old hospital laundry attendant and the groom's mother. After becoming a widow while her son, Bramwell, was still a young boy, she spent more than 20 years working overnight shifts and taking every extra hour she could. Everything she earned helped Bramwell finish school and build a good career as a civil engineer. Long before this wedding was ever planned, Isadora had sealed a small glass jar filled with ceremonial rice that once belonged to Bramwell's grandmother. In her family, that rice had always been passed down as a quiet blessing for a new marriage. She had promised herself she would save it for her son's wedding day. When the wedding plans came together, the bride's family chose a modern ceremony and decided not to include the old tradition. Isadora accepted their choice without making an argument. She simply slipped the jar into her handbag before leaving home. She was not trying to change the ceremony or draw attention to herself. She only hoped she could quietly give her son one last family blessing after everything was over. I honestly feel that her wish was so simple that almost any parent would understand it. After spending most of her life putting her son first, this small moment meant everything to her. When the ceremony ended, the heavy church doors opened and applause filled the front courtyard. Bramwell and his bride stepped outside, smiling, while photographers quickly arranged everyone for a large group picture. Parents, grandparents, bridesmaids, and groomsmen slowly moved closer to the entrance as they were asked to take their places. Guests leaned in with their phones to capture the moment. Like the other close family members, Isadora walked toward the front so she could congratulate the newly married couple before everyone left for the reception. As she reached the edge of the landing, she opened her handbag, took a small handful of the ceremonial rice, and gently tossed it toward Bramwell and his bride. It was only a small amount, but several grains landed on the smooth marble near the top of the steps. At almost the same time, one of the groomsmen was following the photographer's directions. Instead of watching where he was stepping, he moved sideways to make room for others in the picture. His polished dress shoe came down on the loose rice resting on the slick marble surface. As his weight shifted, his footing gave way for just a moment. He stumbled hard into Isadora before anyone nearby could react. Everything changed almost instantly. The sudden impact pushed her backward. She lost her balance at the edge of the landing, struck one of the marble steps as she fell, and continued tumbling down several more before coming to a stop near the bottom. The cheering disappeared. Family members and guests rushed toward her while others called for help. Bramwell reached his mother within moments and stayed beside her until emergency workers arrived. I cannot imagine watching the happiest day of your life turn into something so heartbreaking in only a few seconds. Isadora was taken to a regional trauma center with severe head and body injuries. Her family waited there, hoping she would recover, but she later died from the injuries she suffered in the fall. The wedding reception was canceled before guests left the church. Instead of driving away with his new wife in the decorated wedding car, Bramwell followed the ambulance carrying the woman who had spent most of her life making sacrifices for him. Officials concluded that the accident happened because loose grains of rice remained on the polished marble landing. The groomsman lost his footing while moving sideways without looking down, and the accidental collision caused Isadora to fall backward down the steps. No criminal charges were filed because the death was ruled a tragic accident caused by a combination of reduced footing, distraction, and the force of the unintended impact. To me, the hardest part is knowing that the final gift she tried to give her son was a quiet blessing filled with love. Yet that same loving act became the last thing she ever did. Instead of remembering the day for wedding photos and happy memories, Bramwell's family would forever remember it as the day a mother's lifelong devotion ended in heartbreaking loss. Isadora only wanted to give her son one final blessing before the celebration continued. The next story follows a father whose happiest moment ended before the ceremony even began. It was September 18, 2019, at a licensed mountain wedding venue in Colorado. The ceremony had not started because the bride's close family was gathered on a stone terrace overlooking the valley for photos. Most guests chatted with relatives while waiting for the photographer to finish. Michael Crosswell, a 61-year-old retired commercial marine engineer and the bride's father. For more than 30 years, he worked aboard cargo ships, often spending weeks away from home. He missed many family events, but every trip helped provide a steady life for his wife and daughter. Retirement finally gave him something his career never could: time. He used those years to rebuild a close relationship with his daughter, and when she asked him to walk her down the aisle, he saw it as a chance to be there for one of the moments he had missed so often before. The smile on his face that afternoon came from knowing he had been given another opportunity to stand beside her. Nearby stood a lightweight aluminum wedding arch, decorated with flowers and long pieces of white fabric. Earlier that day, venue workers had secured it because the weather forecast called for stronger winds later in the afternoon. For hours, the anchors held, but the repeated gusts slowly loosened one side. The movement was slight enough that nobody paying attention to family pictures had any reason to think something was wrong. Relatives continued changing places as each photograph was taken. Some stepped forward, while others moved aside so different combinations of family members could be photographed. Michael stayed beside his daughter the entire time, waiting for the picture they would treasure for years. Seeing that part of the day reminds me how ordinary life usually feels right before something unexpected happens. Nobody there had a reason to be worried. Without warning, a stronger gust swept across the terrace. The hanging fabric caught the wind, pulling the wedding arch toward the family group. Michael reacted immediately. He took the bouquet from his daughter's hands and passed it to the photographer so he could use both hands. He reached toward the leaning frame as venue staff rushed from the opposite side. Together, they stopped the arch before it could fall onto the people standing nearby. The danger seemed to be over. Still watching the wedding arch to make sure it remained steady, Michael backed toward his daughter without looking at where he was placing his feet. Michael stepped backward to return beside his daughter. His shoe landed on loose gravel close to the edge of the terrace. The stones shifted under his weight, and his foot slid backward. He tried to recover, but the ground beneath him gave way too quickly. Relatives stretched out their arms, but they could not reach him before he lost his balance. He fell over the low stone border and rolled down the steep, rocky hillside below. What strikes me most is that Michael wasn't trying to be brave or heroic. His reaction was the kind of split-second decision many people would make without even stopping to think. The wedding stopped before anyone even reached the ceremony area. Guests moved back while workers secured the terrace, and rescue crews carefully climbed down the rocky slope. The uneven ground made reaching Michael difficult, and bringing him back to the terrace took time. He was rushed for emergency medical treatment, but later died from the severe injuries caused by the fall. The evidence showed that the wind had gradually loosened one anchor holding the decorative arch. Michael stepped in to steady it while venue staff secured the opposite side. As he turned away, he lost stable footing on loose gravel near the terrace edge, causing the fatal fall. Officials ruled his death an accident brought about by unstable footing and the unexpected chain of events created by the shifting decoration. The venue later strengthened safety practices around elevated photography areas and reviewed how temporary wedding structures were secured during windy weather. The bride never walked down the aisle with her father. Instead of remembering the day as the beginning of her marriage, she remembered it as the last afternoon she ever spent standing beside him. I think that's the part that lingers the longest. Not the accident itself, but the quiet fact that the moment they had both waited years to share simply never arrived. Michael's last instinct was to protect the people standing beside him. Up next is a groom whose first act as a husband became something no one expected. It was October 8th, 2022, at a historic reception hall in Nashville, Tennessee. Dinner had just been served, and guests moved between the buffet tables, dance floor, and their seats while children played beneath the banquet tables. The reception was at its busiest, with nearly every chair occupied. The groom was Merritt Thorne, a 34-year-old commercial fire alarm technician. Every week, he worked inside office buildings, schools, and businesses, installing and checking fire alarm systems to help keep people safe. safe. Friends often joked that he could never stop noticing exit signs or blocked doorways. Even during his own wedding reception, he quietly reminded a few relatives not to leave gifts near an emergency exit because people might need that space if something ever went wrong. His bride, Emily, was a single mother, and her 6-year-old son had proudly carried one of the wedding rings earlier that day. Merritt had never called him his stepson. To him, the little boy was simply his son. Throughout the evening, the child spent most of his time crawling beneath banquet tables with the other children, pretending they were secret forts. People spend years learning a job, but very few expect those lessons to matter during the happiest day of their own lives. Merritt had no way of knowing that his everyday habits would soon become far more important than the wedding itself. Behind one decorated wall, temporary power lines supplied electricity to food warmers and drink stations. During setup, workers had noticed one connection felt warmer than expected, but they found no visible damage and everything continued operating. As the reception carried on, the overloaded lines slowly became hotter behind the wall covering until smoke finally began spreading into the room. At first, several guests thought the smell came from the kitchen. Then, the fire alarm sounded. Staff immediately directed everyone toward the nearest exits. Merritt stayed beside his new wife while helping nearby guests move outside. The hall emptied quickly as smoke became thicker near the ceiling. Once families gathered outside, parents began counting children and making sure everyone had escaped safely. That was when Emily realized her 6-year-old son was missing. Several relatives called the child's name, believing he had left with someone else during the evacuation. Merritt suddenly remembered watching him crawl beneath one of the banquet tables only a short time earlier. The little game that had made everyone smile during dinner now became the first place he believed the frightened boy might still be hiding. Without waiting for firefighters to reach him, Merritt ran back through the doorway. I can't imagine making that decision any differently. Blood had nothing to do with it. In that moment, Merritt wasn't thinking about biology. He was thinking about his little boy. Inside, the smoke had become much heavier. Merritt found the child curled beneath the same banquet table where he had been playing before the alarm. Keeping him low to the floor, Merritt guided him toward the nearest exit. As they reached the doorway, part of the decorative wall covering and ceiling trim, weakened by the fire behind it, broke loose and crashed down beside the exit. Merritt shoved the boy through the remaining opening, where family members immediately pulled him outside. The falling debris briefly blocked Merritt's path, forcing him back into the thickest smoke. By the time firefighters cleared enough space to reach him just moments later, he had already collapsed from severe smoke inhalation. Firefighters carried him outside, and paramedics immediately began treating him. The 6-year-old recovered without serious injury, but Merritt later died from complications caused by smoke inhalation. Investigators determined that an overloaded temporary catering power circuit overheated behind decorative wall coverings, filling the hall with smoke. They found no evidence that the venue had knowingly ignored the hazard or acted with criminal negligence. His bride left the reception wearing the wedding ring Merritt had placed on her hand only a short time earlier. Instead of marking the beginning of their life together, it became a reminder of the final promise he kept that day. Merritt was never that little boy's father by blood, but in the moments that mattered most, he proved he was his father by heart. His son lived because Merritt made sure he got out first. We've got 2 more heartbreaking wedding tragedies coming up, so hit that subscribe button if you want to see how the happiest day of someone's life turned into their family's darkest memory. It was July 2nd, 2017, at a rural estate in Andalusia, Spain. The wedding ceremony had already ended, but before dinner, the bride's family continued a long-standing tradition in which the newly married couple walked beside a young breeding bull while relatives watched from outside a fenced area. As handlers checked the animal, photographers prepared for one final picture. The groom was Evander Sinclair, a 30-year-old livestock veterinarian. Caring for cattle had been part of his daily work for years, and people who knew him often turned to him whenever questions about farm animals came up. That afternoon was no different. While everyone waited for the photographs, a few relatives looked toward Evander for reassurance that the bull appeared calm. He never sought the spotlight, yet his calm presence helped put everyone around him at ease. I've met people who work around large animals, and one thing they almost always say is that respect matters more than confidence. Even animals that seem calm can surprise you without warning. Inside the secured area, the young bull stood quietly while trained handlers held the lead rope. Temporary fencing surrounded the space, keeping guests at a safe distance. White ribbons tied to nearby decorations moved gently whenever the afternoon breeze picked up. Before the ceremonial walk began, relatives asked if they could take one last family photograph with the bull standing in the background. To capture a better angle, the drone operator slowly lowered the drone closer to the group. The buzzing sound grew louder overhead. At the same time, the wind caught several ribbons, making them snap and flutter across the courtyard. The bull suddenly lifted its head and shifted its weight. One handler tightened his grip, but as he stepped backward across uneven ground, his foot slipped. The lead rope slid free before anyone could stop it. Guests quickly moved behind the viewing barriers while the remaining handlers spread out, trying to guide the bull back toward the middle of the courtyard. For a few seconds, it looked as though they were regaining control. That was when the handler nearest Evander called for assistance. Evander stepped inside the fenced area because he was the only livestock professional standing close enough to help immediately. He moved carefully toward the bull, guiding it away from the crowd and toward an open section where the handlers had more room to work. From where the guests were standing, it probably looked like everything was settling down again. I doubt anyone watching believed those next few seconds would change the entire day. The bull turned in the direction Evander wanted, and another handler reached for the loose rope. Just before it could be secured, the startled animal suddenly changed direction. It struck Evander with enough force to knock him to the ground. Within moments, the handlers regained full control and prevented the bull from reaching anyone else. Emergency responders arrived quickly, while relatives were escorted away from the courtyard. Evander was taken for emergency medical treatment, but later died from the severe injuries he suffered during the incident. No other guests received serious injuries, and the ceremony planned for later that evening was quietly canceled as both families gathered together. Authorities reviewed drone footage, guest recordings, and statements from witnesses who had been inside the secured area. The evidence showed that the drone had descended closer to the bull during the family photograph, while one handler lost stable footing on uneven ground, allowing the lead rope to slip free. Officials concluded that those events together caused the animal to become unpredictable. They also confirmed that Evander entered the area voluntarily because his professional experience made him the most qualified person nearby to assist the handlers, not because anyone directed him to do so. After the wedding, the bride's family made a decision that remained in place from then on. The ceremonial walk with the breeding bull, a tradition passed through generations, was never included in another family wedding. To me, that quiet decision speaks louder than any memorial ever could. Some traditions end because families move on, but others end because the people they loved are simply too important to lose again. Evander used his experience to protect others, but events changed in an instant. The final story begins with a bride whose dream wedding was unfolding exactly as planned. It was April 23, 2016, in Charleston, South Carolina. The wedding ceremony had ended, and guests gathered outside the old church to watch the bride and groom leave in a horse-drawn carriage. The streets were more crowded than usual because a city festival was taking place nearby. Friends held sparklers, children waved from the sidewalk, and many people raised their phones to record what everyone expected would be the perfect ending to the day. The bride was Romilly Gable, a 28-year-old elementary school teacher. Long before she met the man she married, she had dreamed of ending her wedding with a carriage ride through Charleston's historic streets. She loved old traditions and believed that slow ride through the city would be the memory she would carry for the rest of her life. To make that dream come true, the couple hired a licensed carriage company that had spent years giving rides through the historic district. The horse chosen for the trip had already completed several peaceful rides that same afternoon, and before leaving, the driver calmly reviewed the usual safety instructions with the newlywed. There are days when every plan seems to come together perfectly. Sadly, this became the kind of day that reminds us even the best plans cannot control everything happening around us. The carriage rolled away as guests clapped and watched it disappear around the corner. One by one, people began putting out their sparklers, collecting their jackets, and talking about the reception that had just ended. Others stayed on the sidewalk, replaying the videos they had recorded only moments before. Nothing about those quiet minutes gave anyone a reason to believe something had gone wrong. Then, A loud explosion echoed through the nearby streets. People turned toward the sound without knowing where it had come from. A person on a nearby side street had ignited an unauthorized aerial firework as part of the festival crowd. The sudden blast startled the carriage horse. The experienced driver immediately pulled back on the reins and used the same calming commands that had worked during earlier trips that day. But the unexpected noise had already frightened the animal. The horse surged forward before gradually responding to the driver's control. The horse had no idea it was carrying newlyweds or taking part in someone's happiest day. It simply reacted the way frightened animals sometimes do when they are surprised by a sudden explosion. As the carriage entered a turn along the old cobblestone street, one wheel struck an uneven section of stone, causing the carriage to lurch sharply to one side. Romilly's husband grabbed the side of the carriage with one hand while reaching toward her with the other, but the sideways jolt happened too quickly. Romilly lost her balance and was thrown from the carriage onto the street. The driver continued steering toward a wider intersection where he finally brought the frightened horse under control and stopped. Bystanders rushed toward the scene while emergency responders were called. Romilly was taken for emergency medical treatment, but she later died from the severe injuries she suffered in the fall. Afterward, investigators carefully examined the carriage, its wheels, the harness, and the braking equipment. They found no mechanical problems that could have caused the incident. Guest recordings, nearby business security cameras, and traffic cameras all showed the same sequence of events. Officials concluded that the unauthorized aerial firework caused the horse's startle response, and the sudden movement over uneven cobblestones produced the sharp jolt that threw Romilly from the carriage. No evidence suggested negligence by the licensed carriage company or its driver. As evening settled over Charleston, the festival continued with music, lights, and crowds filling the same streets where the carriage had traveled only a short time before. At the same time, one family quietly left without the joyful ending they had spent months preparing for. Sometimes, the smallest choice made by a stranger can become a memory another family carries for the rest of their lives. That is what makes stories like this so difficult to forget.